This is the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. Andy Payton is the lead pastor at Methodist Temple United Methodist Church in Evansville, Indiana. Randy Moore is associate pastor at Methodist Temple. Their goal is to see Christ in everything and everyone.
Welcome to the podcast, friends. I'm Pastor Randy Moore, joined as always by Pastor Andy Payton, and we have arrived at Holy Week.
Yep.
Here we are.
Here we are.
This is Wednesday of Holy Week, and so it is. It's a busy week. Maundy Thursday tomorrow, Good Friday on Friday, Good Saturday, which is just Jesus is in the tomb. We don't do a lot. We just wait on Saturday, and then Easter Sunday's coming.
Symbolically speaking, on Saturday, we just don't have a service to honor the tomb.
Right. Yeah.
Which I find that's interesting that we don't do anything on Saturday, because that is so filled with meaning. This idea that he goes into the tomb and there's this period of waiting. Mm-hmm. And as you know, there's so much symbolism and there's so much we could glean from that moment in Jesus' life as we think about what it could tell us about our own too.
Yeah. Well, let's do our soul check-in. And I did make an attempt at fasting this time. And it didn't go as well as I hoped it would, but I got enough of a taste of it to know that it's beneficial, that it could be something very, very helpful in my practice.
How so?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious in that if you're giving up something like food, which you're used to having 3+ times a day, it is a constant, your hunger is a constant reminder of why you're doing it. You're doing it to be aware of the presence of God. Mm-hmm. And we can quickly forget that God's present. Mm-hmm. And so it does focus your spirit, your mind in a certain way. But what happened, and I think I explained this early on in Lent, was that I didn't want it to interfere with my life with my wife. For instance, for me to say, well, forgot to tell you, I'm fasting tonight. And she's like, well, what am I going to do for dinner? Mm-hmm. So it's something that you have to navigate, and be sensitive to others in your life.
Well, the instruction in the Sermon on the Mount has to do with keeping it secret, right?
Yeah.
I found that interesting. It's very practical.
Right.
You don't want to do it so that you come across as you're righteous or something, and holier than thou. That's not the point. It's right. It's to train yourself, as you're saying, spiritually. And so, if it's keeping you from loving someone in your life or connecting,
right,
then no, that's not it. That's not the purpose. So,
and Wesley, he fasted all the time, but he didn't have a wife either. So,
well, he did, but it didn't
work out.
It didn't go so well. No.
How about you?
Me? I tried fasting during Lent this year. In terms of my soul today, the thing I've kind of come back around to during this Lenten journey has been the practice of contemplation and silence. I find that incredibly helpful when it comes to my own prayer life. And so I've noticed, if you go back to Andy at the very beginning of Lent versus Andy today, I am spending more and more time in prayer as we progress toward Easter Sunday. And so in terms of my own spiritual life, that is very, very beneficial. And so I feel dialed in as a result.
What is the place of Holy Week for you, and what is its place in the church, and in particular, Methodist Temple?
Well, it's, in terms of just the faith, it's the highest and holiest moment of the Christian year. It's really bigger than Christmas, in my opinion. Although Christmas is beautiful and it's wonderful, and the theology of Christmas is good, there's something else happening during Holy Week. Of course, we recount and we remember the last moments of Christ's earthly life, starting with Palm Sunday, moving into Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter. We're thinking about Christ, his life. But really, in my opinion, and I don't think I'm alone in this. Really, what needs to happen for us in terms of our lives today is we are able now, as a result of Christ's life, we are able to see our lives in a new way. And what I mean by that is we are able to use Holy Week as a lens to think about how God's working in our lives, the pattern that God works in our lives. And so the way I would lay it out is Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter. They're not just events in Jesus' life 2,000 years ago, but really they are moments in which we can see the seasons of our own lives at work too. So we all have the Palm Sunday moment in our lives where the world seems to be cheering us on, right? I mean, that happens. And then we have those Maundy Thursday moments where it's going okay, but we're asking ourselves, when's the next shoe going to drop? We all have the crucifixion of Good Friday where, I mean, the world breaks our heart. We lose something significant. Quite frankly, all hell breaks loose. And then we live our lives in such a way where we know that, well, that's not going to have the final word. Easter's coming, and there's going to be new life. And so really what begins to happen when you see that as a lens through which we see our own lives, really what we can do now is to experience this life with a sense of wisdom and a sense of faith and a sense of hope. It's not that now it's very important to we realize this, it's not that we avoid these seasons. The gospel is never death avoided. It's death transformed. Mm-hmm. And I find that very interesting in the life of the church, how many people have a tendency to skip from Palm Sunday, the celebration and parade, to Easter, another celebration and parade, but they never want to approach Good Friday, the tragedy of life. And really, it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense unless you're willing to face the difficult stuff, the tragedy of our lives. And so, I don't know, I mean, that's how I kind of see it, Randy. I'll throw it back to you, but
I think Good Friday is the answer, part of the answer to why bad things happen to good people. And that is maybe the number one question people have, is that how can there be this loving God if all this bad stuff happens? And I always come back to the cross on that. And I come back to it, a lot of the reason why I come back to it is that I lost my first wife to pancreatic cancer, and she suffered greatly. And the only way I could process that in a positive way was through the cross. Mm. So that's why Friday is so important to me. You know, Good Friday is so important to me. I was thinking as I was driving in today, is this too simplistic of a way to think about it? Because we do tend to skip from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, and our cross in the Protestant church is empty, and the cross for our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters is a crucifix with Christ hanging on it. And so, again, this is way, way simplified, I guess, but the cross for the Roman Catholic Church shows us a real emphasis on Friday, where our emphasis is more on Sunday.
Well, the symbolism of the fact that we do not put Christ on the cross in Protestant churches is fascinating. I'm thinking more about what you're saying in terms of your first wife.
Yeah.
And how that Good Friday makes sense of that for you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't provide an answer, does it? I mean, it just doesn't provide the answer, in my opinion, Randy. But I've been thinking about the symbolism of Good Friday a lot too. And the thing that I think Good Friday does is the same thing that a cross at the center of a worship space also does. It's this reminder that we have to face the difficult things head on. Jesus in the Gospel says to the disciples repeatedly, you must carry your cross. You must face the tragedy, the fear, the worrying that something bad is going to happen. You must face the reality that it's going to happen. And none of us avoid that. I mean, in some way, it's all different. It's different for each one of us, right? It's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about like Jesus's life now in that way, what does he face in that whole drama? Well, he faces betrayal. One of his closest allies and friends, Judas, betrays him. He experiences abandonment. His friends that he had invested so much in, they're gone. He experiences the crowd turning against him. He experiences a politician that doesn't care about the truth and is more interested in what the people want. He experiences people using religion in a not so good and healthy way. He faces all of that head on in the cross. And so as we think about our own lives, we are invited now, we're really challenged now to face all of those things too. Betrayal, abandonment, fear of the crowd, politicians, religion in the negative way. You could just start going down the list, all the things that we avoid. Mm-hmm. And so the next thing that happens is as we face those things, what happens next is they no longer have the power over us that they once did when we turn and face them. And in that moment, we're going into more of a resurrection type of experience. It's this rising again to new life. That really the psychology of the cross is pretty profound, really. Mm-hmm. And so it's never death avoided. It's transformed. Mm-hmm. We face the difficulty of the human experience, the tragedy of the human experience, and we are able to say now, even in this, good is going to can come out of even in this.
It is somehow redemptive.
Yes.
We don't want to suffer. We don't want to intentionally bring suffering on us, but it is somehow redemptive because there is the rising after the suffering.
Right. And you mentioned like one of the big questions people have is why do bad things happen to good people? Mm-hmm. And people will use that as a reason not to believe in God. But it's interesting, almost paradoxical to me how people who are going through difficulty, if you've ever sat with someone in difficulty, sat with something who is dying, mm-hmm. It's not like that many times for us. Mm-hmm. They don't feel like God's abandoned them. In fact, if you talk to them, they feel very close to God, right, in the midst of that pain. And so it's again contradictory. It's paradoxical. It doesn't all quite go together, but it's like God meets us in the pain, not as the cause, but as the sustainer through it. Mm-hmm. And so like if you stop and really think about the gospel in these ways, what you start to realize is its utter realism. It really is. It's a tragedy how sometimes we take the gospel and we turn it into this otherworldly thing. Like, oh, I've said the prayer now. I'm going to heaven. And it's because I believe in all these things now. And I'm like, that's just shallow. And it's certainly not courageous.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about it, we take for granted that Christ died, but did Christ really have to die? Did God really have to die? Couldn't Christ have just, floated back up into heaven without a death? No, he died. And we die.
We die.
And we die.
Yes. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine about my Easter message, and we were just chatting, and I said, the thing about me, every Easter I come rolling around to Easter again, and I find myself fascinated. I really am. I'm fascinated with how is it that this Sunday in the middle of spring gathers the most amount of people to church again and again, and we all kind of lean in and listen. We know the story, you know the story. I know the story of Easter, and yet it draws us together. And then, I start thinking more about it, and this is my blessing and my curse is like just constant reflection. And so you think about the stories themselves, like the gospel narratives of Christ on Easter Sunday morning, the moment where the women go and the disciples respond, all that, like the meaning and the depths of meaning there, you just can't exhaust it. Mm-hmm. It's just bottomless. It just keeps going and going. And I mean, it's just, if there ever was an inspired story, it is this one. And you can't quite put words to it either. Mm-hmm. And we all get caught up in it. And I mean, I know sometimes pastors give folks a hard time, I'll see you at Christmas, glad you came to Easter worship. I'll see you at Christmas. I just, there's no part of me that wants to give anyone a hard time about that. Like, what I want to say to them is, if you get this message, you go back out into the world, and even if you don't come back to church, I hope you come back to church, but even if you don't go back to church, if you get this message, hope is yours. Mm-hmm. It can't be stopped. It's just, I don't know. We could go on and on, but
we're not going to look at any of the epistle lessons today. We're going to look at some of the gospel lessons for this week. But I do want to ask you this question, and I didn't prep you for it, but I know that you can answer it. The Apostle Paul didn't say a whole lot about the life of Christ. I mean, for him, it was Christ crucified and Christ resurrected. And I just wonder what you think about that, because I think we have a more holistic approach. Yes, it's this week, and especially those 3 days, but there was a life as well. There was a Jesus who did something among people for, however many years, 30 years, or a 1-year ministry or a 3-year ministry, but he did things. Mm-hmm. But for Paul and for Christianity, this is the week. It's the death and the resurrection.
In Paul's mind, it's all we need to know. And I'm not trying to overly simplify, because really in his mind, it's all we need to know. And I was thinking this morning, I'm like, how would I have imagined Christ coming out of the tomb? And the thing I imagined is, like, first off, a burst of light, but then second, like, I imagine Jesus coming out of the tomb with a T-shirt that says, "I told you so." and so what do I mean by that? Like, the "I told you so" is not that he told them that he was going to die and rise again. I mean, he did tell them that, but it's a bigger "I told you so." And the bigger "I told you so" is, in the beginning, God said it was good. Mm-hmm. In the crucifixion and the resurrection, God comes back and says, "I told you so." Mm-hmm. It's good. You come from good, sustained by good. You go back to good. Ultimately, the world is a friendly place. Even though it breaks our hearts, it's good. I told you so. Mm-hmm. That's all you need to know. Mm-hmm. And so now the cross, Christ crucified. In the first century context of Paul, crucifixion was used by the Romans to bully people and put them in their place. And the Christians take that, God takes that, the worst that they have to offer, and overcomes it. And it's an ultimate "I told you so" moment, right? I mean, mm-hmm. And so essentially to wear a cross in Paul's day is to say, throw the worst at me you got. Mm-hmm. I believe in the love that's greater. Mm-hmm. And this is radical stuff. And that's why I always say, I don't domesticate the gospel. Just don't do it. It's utter realism. It's this, like, facing these things and be like, no, you big bully, Caesar, no. You think you're powerful. You're not. You have no idea the power that you're flirting with here. Like, you don't get it, do you? Like, oh, good for you and your army and all their stuff you have, and people are afraid of you, and you can put people on the cross and all this stuff. And then along comes, and the lesson last week, Randy, you read for Palm Sunday from Paul, along comes Jesus, who, it says he takes the form, some translations say servant, but the actual word is slave, mm-hmm. takes the form of a slave, the lowest possible place in the society in the world of that time, takes that on and lives it out. And it's like, you think the powerful are the people that are in charge, but no. It's the God that breathes life into all things, even the slaves. That's the one, that's the powerful one. It's just, oh my gosh. I know that we're probably not even doing what we're supposed to do.
That's all right. But it's all good stuff.
Yeah.
Let's get into some of these texts. Tell us about Maundy Thursday. Tell us about it itself. And I don't have the schedule in front of me, but we're recording on Wednesday. This will be posted today. So some people will see this on Wednesday or Thursday. And so make an invitation to the listeners to Maundy Thursday, and then tell us a little bit about what's behind it.
Well, it's the retelling of the Last Supper, where the Lord's Supper is instituted, and Jesus sits down with his disciples and, of course, shares bread and shares the cup. And then in John's Gospel, we add on this idea that after the supper was over, he washed the disciples' feet. And so really what's happening on Maundy Thursday really is, again, when's the next shoe going to drop? That's the moment. And for us, as we participate in that supper, as we remember that supper, what could its meaning be for our lives? Well, just take the words of Jesus for what they are in this moment. This is my body, which is given for you. This is my blood, which is given for you. And then the words, do this in remembrance of me. We remember Jesus. We remember his story. We come face to face with a God who meets us in the physical and the tangible. And it's back to this realism again. I heard a great line recently where the person said, it's easier to convince people that the bread and the cup are the body and the blood of Christ. What's much more difficult is to convince them that's what they are too. And so, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, I think, but but it's this moment where, we remember who Christ is, and then in doing so, we also remember who we are too.
Mm-hmm. Let me read the text. It's John 13, 1-17, and then 31-35. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already decided that Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, would betray Jesus. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from supper, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. And he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus answered, you do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand. Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, one who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. Are you clean, though? And you are clean, though not all of you. For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had reclined again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, slaves are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. When he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. There's that commandment. I mean,
Where do we unpack?
Yeah.
Where do you want to go with that one?
Yeah.
I read some stuff about John recently. I think that comes from John 13, what you just read. A few chapters later, Jesus says to the disciples, the Greeks had two words for seeing. One word is like you see with your physical eye, and the other word has more to do with like you see spiritually. And so in John's Gospel in chapter 16, there's this line where Jesus says, "You see me now physically, but then I'm going to the Father then, and you will see me in a spiritual way." And so you hear echoes of that. I come from God. I'm going back to God. You'll see me now, but you're not able to go to the place that I'm going. He's going back to the God that is with us always, and the two are one. And it's this invitation to see spiritually, and in light of that, we love. It's really, John's gospel is just, you take one passage and just run with it, right? I mean, it's filled with all that kind of a theological reflection and insight. So,
okay, so we're going to be observing Maundy Thursday with some of our Methodist brothers and sisters from other congregations.
Yeah, coming together, uniting through the gift of the Lord's Supper. Sure.
Okay, Good Friday then. I'm not going to read all of it. The Good Friday text is, it's 2 chapters long. Let me pick it up.
Well, what stands out to you about Good Friday? I mean, because it is long.
I was just trying to find a way to cut this down.
Traditionally, if we would do like exactly what the Book of Worship says, it recommends that we read all of these passages, and everyone is supposed to stand. And so it's in a sense kind of painful. It creates a pain, It's hard to stand and listen to one reader read like 3 chapters from the Bible. That's challenging. I mean, in and of itself. And so, this is at the end when in John's Gospel, doesn't Jesus say it is finished? Is this where he says it is finished in John's Gospel, Randy?
Let's see here.
Towards the end of Jesus' life. And Pilate also says, what is truth? In this exchange where Jesus goes before Pilate, there's this exchange where Pilate said, well, what's truth? Yeah.
Yeah, 1930, Jesus says, it is finished.
Yeah. Then he gave up his spirit.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just trying to find a place to pick this up. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who will get it. They're talking about his clothing. This was to fulfill what the scripture says. They divided my clothes among them. For my clothing they cast lots, and that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciples whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, Woman, here is your son. Then he said to the disciple, Here is your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her into his home. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, I am thirsty. A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, It is finished. Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth, so that you also may continue to believe. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled, none of his bones shall be broken. And again, another passage of scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices and linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so because of it, it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby. They laid Jesus there. I just think it's critical, so important to do Good Friday, whether you're at a Good Friday service or not.
How do you do Good Friday?
Well, you recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
You recognize it. You don't allow yourself to skip from Palm Sunday to Easter. Because while we are Easter people, there's no Easter without that death, first. So, how do you do Good Friday?
I go to 3 different services. Oh no, I think there's I guess the thing that goes to my mind is like you ask yourself, what death am I avoiding? What pain in my life am I running from? What do I need to face? Mm-hmm. And, Christ died so that we might live for righteousness is one of the lines that are used in the Good Friday services. And, our culture today, we just run, right? We just run from any pain. We run from the difficult thing. We run. And if it doesn't get fixed quickly, because we're a culture of instant gratification, if it's not dealt with in a timely way, we're angry. Mm-hmm. But we really never deal with it. We're just still running, even in the anger. And so, I guess how do I do Good Friday? What do I need to face, right? Like, what do I need to deal with? What difficult conversation do I need to have? These kinds of things. What am I afraid of?
Okay, we're about down to the end of our time. This has been really good. But let's talk about Easter, even if we do it in a preview sort of a way, because we've been talking about this. We don't want to rush Easter, but we do want to include this. And so why don't I read John's version of the Easter story. You are going to be preaching this Easter on Luke's version of the resurrection, and so we'll hold that for next week's podcast. But let me read this story from John. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not touch me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. That's John.
It's John. Yep. I love it that she mistakes him for the gardener.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this right before the podcast, and I said the point that I take away from that is what John's trying to tell us is that Christ is risen now indicates that we're back in the garden again.
He is the gardener. She wasn't mistaken.
He is it. And what's the garden? Well, that's the place before the fall where they walked and talked with God. And now what Christ has done is opened up the door so that we can go back to walking and talking with God again, the gardener. It's really cool. I mean, the symbolism, and it's just very cool. I'm not saying that it literally didn't happen. I'm not saying everything's just a symbol. Don't get me wrong on that. But
right.
But the theology of it is brilliant. It's really cool. So, and John's Gospel is the only one that says that, that talks about it in this way, where it's the garden, the gardener, all this and that. So
yeah, it would be another podcast or 2 or 100, but to talk about this relationship between Jesus and the first gardener, Adam, and what Jesus was able to accomplish and Adam wasn't. But yeah, I love the idea that he's the gardener. I think you can think of him as the gardener too, who asks for one more year to see if he could bring fruit from the unfruitful fig tree. Mm-hmm. So the gardening image is a really, really good one.
Well, it's an image of life. It's an image of seed planting. I mean, it's all there, mm-hmm. Tilling the soil, taking care of things, like all of that. It's all in there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the ancients used it for a good reason. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up right there. And thank you for listening. We hope that your Holy Week has been a meaningful one. We invite you to take a deep dive into it and if you can, participate in a Maundy Thursday service and a Good Friday service and an Easter service as well. And we'll meet again next week and we'll break it down even further. But again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you real soon.
This has been the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. You are welcome to join us at Methodist Temple in person or online. Methodist Temple is at 2109 Lincoln Avenue in Evansville, Indiana. Our traditional Sunday morning worship service is at 8:30 with our contemporary service at 11. Log on to our website at methodisttemple.church. We see Christ in you.